Okay, there we go. All right, so now it's recording. But basically, guys, I wanted to, there is a good amount here that I wanted to talk through. I also wanted to just let you know that for next class, there is a good amount of reading to get through. We're gonna try to go through um, some kind of more of the technical things, and not that this isn't also involved with that, but go through some more kind of technical, more mathy things next week or next class. But also we're going to start to delve into stuff about like lens coatings, lens materials. There's a little bit of that in this too. But I just want to give you like a little heads up that you're probably going to have more reading that you'll need to do than for this past class. So just give yourself a little extra time. And I'm going to post that stuff very shortly. So I know I was a little late with this class, so you'll have it earlier than the other one. But let me just get this over here. Okay, so basically, guys, I'm just gonna kind of talk through what you read. So a lot of what you started with was going through parts of book two, basically. So I had you guys start with, sorry, where did it go? With page one, or sorry, it's 213 it looks like. So I'm gonna just kind of pull that up right now and take a quick look. Does that make sense? Meeting two. Okay. Sorry, I'm a little out of order here because we also did anatomy. Okay, we also did the anatomy book as well. Okay. So let's, I just want to see what we should start with here. Okay, I'm hoping that I told you guys. Now I'm like, oh man, it only says page. So fill me in, guys, just briefly. I'm looking at the meeting two, and it says book two, basic optical principles, page 213. Is that all that I assigned? I may have edited my document inadvertently. Did I just tell you one page to read from that book?
Let me take a look. Because I know I ended up reading all the way down to the glossary, with
Okay.
terms, unless that's the wrong one.
No, no, that's fine. I kind of wanted you to read that, and I'm kind of looking now and being like, oh man, did I only assign you um that little bit? So, either way, we'll kind of, talk through stuff just to kind of, if it's more of an intro, then it turns out, then that's what it'll be. But what I wanted to do was introduce you a little bit to prism, and also to kind of what a condensing lens does versus a diverging lens, right? Um, so let me pick up my notes here. I also wanted to talk to you about different types of astigmatism here too. So let me just pull that up. Just scrolling through my stuff here. Okay. Um, did I? Sorry, guys. I apologize. I think I'm mixing myself up a little bit with meeting three here. I'm like, I always kind of plan the next meeting at the same time, and then I like get a little confused about which one I'm on here. Um, yeah. Okay. So I only had you read the one page. Okay. So basically, unless I'm considering, sorry, guys, give me 2 seconds. Because we're considering this meeting one. Okay, we already did that. Okay, so meeting two. Okay, So meeting two, basically what I wanted to chat first with you about is Prism. Okay. Important for Prism is, a couple basic things. We are gonna return to talking quite a bit about Prism. But one of the things that they kind of go right off the bat talking about, and it kind of applies to the anatomy and physiology part of what you guys read too. But one of the key things to know about Prism is that it's really there to balance out uh, problems or slight deviations of the muscles of the eye, right? So basically, if there is, again, that's kind of ties into the anatomy and physiology, but if there's a slight eye turn, if there's, kind of a muscular imbalance where the eyes are directed, in any sort of way. It could be up, down, it could be out, it could be in. But Prism is designed to correct for that, right? The other important thing is that Prism, really isn't typically done in any kind of contact lens. There may be, some kind of innovated, unusual types of contacts that can help a little bit with it. But in general, it's really just a glasses type of thing, right? Um, the important thing that you want to be remembering about Prism is that the apex and the base come into play quite a bit. So I'm just going to kind of quickly do a whiteboard. um, and show that. We'll see how I do with drawing with my mouse here. But basically, we have just, your typical prism or triangle. The apex is going to be, the point, right? The top. And as you can probably really easily guess, the base is going to be kind of the bottom widest part of the prism. The other parts that are really important to know is that when light enters a prism, it's kind of coming in straight, it goes in, and then when it comes out the other side, the light is going to get directed toward the base. Okay. So you want to be, really cognizant of that, that would be very much a question on the exam is where is light directed? It's going to be toward the base. The other thing that is important, just kind of, I don't know that actually this would be a question on the test, but just for your own knowledge, and because we do work with Prism and you see doctors, prescribing Prism sometimes in the office, the direction that you want the eye to go is going to be the direction in which you put the base of the prism. Okay. So if you want the eyes to kind of be directed out, right, and kind of um, an exo kind of way, or the like them to kind of be pushed this way, you would put the bases out as well. Okay, if you want the eyes to kind of be directed in, you would then put the bases facing in, right? Same thing with up and down. The base is where you want the eyes to go, right? Now, the thing that's a little weird about Prism is just that you're not actually able to turn the eye, right? Like if you put on the glasses, like your eye is not gonna like change like where its preferred posture is, right? But what you're doing is you're changing basically where the image is for that eye, right? So based on where that eye is looking, you're kind of changing, you're jumping the image over a little bit to be in the proper place for that eye. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an aside about Prism. I think that I did give you a document, Prism basis. So let me quickly just grab that real quick, because I do want to pull that up briefly. I'm just gonna um, share. I'll stop my whiteboard for a sec and then just share this one here. So hopefully you can just kind of see this, and I can also, if it's helpful, kind of zoom in just a touch. But basically, this is just looks kind of like a jack-o'-lantern, but basically what it is it shows you kind of what base down, what base up is, what base in is, and what base out is. So the important parts of Prism, and again, we're going to touch on this again later, but I think it's good for you guys to kind of get a sense of what this all means. But basically, if everything is in relation to the nose, okay? So if you think about something being, if you go to the third picture here, if you think about something being base in, think about those bases as kind of pointing to the nose. If you're thinking about things base out, again, it's in reference to the nose. And then, base up and down, I guess that's that's less about the nose. But basically, that one's a little more straightforward. The base is down or the base is up. Okay. But definitely when you read an optical prescription with Prism, and I know you guys have all seen this just, at work, basically now you can kind of say, okay, what is BO? That's going to be base out. BU is going to be base up, so on and so forth. So that's what it means. And it's really just kind of accounting for a muscular imbalance and directing the eyes, well, directing, I should say, the light to account for that muscular imbalance. Okay. So let me move on a bit. I'm going to probably share screens again in a sec, but I'll close this one for now. I did have you look at a let's see, basic optical principles. Okay, so I also had you guys listen to oh no, 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 sorry, I'm on my wrong meeting here. I had you guys watch the YouTube video from Laramie K. So that one, I hope it didn't confuse anyone, because I know it got a little bit more in depth than I would say the reading did, basically. Um, but I'm hoping that that did give you a little bit of a taste of, kind of what Prism is and a little bit about it. I know they did go over, I think, in that video, some of the formulas that you're going to see related to Prism. So, one of the things that's going to kind of come up a little bit later is if the object is 1 meter away, and you have one, diopter of prism, they're going to kind of be like, okay, how much is that diopter moving the object? So there are some things that will be good for memorization, regarding those a little bit later. So yeah, so that's kind of just to, kind of briefly touch on the prism. I'm just going to quickly go back to the book, the page that I asked you guys to look at, and just um, see if there is anything else on that page that I wanted to touch on. Just go to page 13 here. Okay. So yeah, so not super, I think we kind of covered most of it. Talking about image displacement a little bit, kind of, the whole deal. Again, this is something that we'll return to because this is something that is definitely going to be on the test, but kind of the idea, what I just said of kind of if something is 1 meter away and you have one diopter of prism, how much is that going to change it? It's going to be basically a change of 1 centimeter. Like that's basically what the image displacement is. Um, Other than that, I think we talked about the main stuff, the apex, the base. Now I think if I'm reading this right, I told you page 213. I think I really meant 212, so I really apologize about that. Page 213, I have all set to really work on next week. Next week we're going to go through all of book 2, so it sounds like you guys may have done that a little bit as well, which is great, but it is something that we'll talk more about next week. But that will kind of get into the diverging lenses and the converging lenses. What is, a plus lens being two prisms put together base to base, a minus lens being two prisms put together apex to apex, and what that does to the light. We'll also talk about focal points too at that point. So yeah, so that's kind of the story for that I have for for the Basic Optical Principles Book 2. What I wanted to talk about next is and we kind of finished up the Anatomy and Physiology book, so we're pretty much through Book 1. So let me pull that up here as well. Okay. And I asked you to go through page 16. Let me pull that up briefly. I'm going to share my screen again for that. Okay. Um, so basically, guys, for this, I think we touched a little bit on the tunics. I think I told you, not something that I would worry too much about for the test. We did talk last week about accommodation. That's a really important concept. It's, basically related to the lens inside the eye and making sure or having that lens be very flexible when you're young and then becoming more and more rigid as you get older. And, those muscles don't change a ton, but those muscles are no longer able to squeeze that lens as much. That's presbyopia. Surprisingly, a lot of people, are very surprised to know that they're going to need glasses, but it is something that happens to everybody. Um, One thing that I don't think, touch on much for last week is I did want to just make sure that we talked a little bit about the PDs and what one would do for like a near PD versus a distance PD. So this is important. PDs are really important because when you make a pair of glasses, you want to make sure that the lenses are perfectly placed over the person's pupils, right? So you want basically, the optical center of that lens to be right over their pupils and basically the best part of the lens, right? So when you take a PD, when you use the pupillometer, you're typically doing the distance PD. So when they're, kind of looking out to infinity, that's, what you're taking. But they gave you a little formula for how do you figure out their near PD. And the reason for that is that when someone is reading, when someone is looking at a computer, their eyes naturally are going to go into kind of a more ESO posture, right? They're going to kind of converge, they're going to come together. And so you can't use the same PD that you would use for distance when the eyes are in just kind of a very kind of ortho, straight, relaxed state. And what they tell you, and honestly, I have to tell you, this does vary. You'll hear different things about this. But what they're telling you here is they're saying that kind of the larger the PD, the more the person is going to, the more the posture of the person's eyes or pupils are going to change. So what they're saying is that if they have quite a large PD, they're saying to subtract 4 millimeters. If they have a smaller PD, only do 2 millimeters different. Usually, the thing that I've heard again and again is just to kind of in general do about 2.5 millimeters. Again, I do think you hear different things. But the thing that probably would be the best option would be to actually measure the person's near PD, right? So we have pupillometers in the offices. On the pupillometer, you always want it set to infinity first. You always got to check that. But you can also set it to computer distance by turning the little dial at the top, and then also to near distance, which is usually we say about 20 inches away from you. So you could just take the person's PD and see how it measures. Oftentimes PDs are not going to be perfectly symmetrical, so while it's a good rule of thumb to kind of be like, okay, we're going to subtract 2 or we're going to subtract 4, oftentimes when you actually take that near PD, you'll notice that one eye actually might come in a little bit more than the other. Okay. So that's definitely a good rule of thumb. You need to know, okay, what should I be subtracting? And in general, it's going to be somewhere between 2 and 3 is going to be what your answer is. But just for daily practice, because again, the exam doesn't always match up with the best daily practice whenever possible. If you know you're doing a computer pair of glasses or you're doing a near pair of glasses, you want to take that PD right with the patient there. Just as an aside, I would also say that I've been doing a lot of stuff in the lab lately, partially because we moved the lab. But I do notice that with PDs, it seems as though there is a bit of a trend, where it seems as though the left PD is a little bit smaller than the right, right? So we take monocular PDs. So basically, we're kind of doing one eye at a time in the pupillometer. So what I want to encourage everyone, and I should probably just say this at the optical meeting too, but what I really want you to do when you take a person's PD is first off, try as hard as you can, just like with a seg height measurement, to be right, as much on their level, kind of, if you need to move up and down your chair, that's really helpful. But try to be, at their head level, their eye level as much as possible. But I would also encourage you, if possible, to have them pull into the table nice and close so that you can put your elbows down on the table and really anchor that pupillometer right against their forehead, but also just really, really kind of steadily. Sometimes if it's kind of like up in the air like this, it can get, I think, a measurement that's not quite right. So definitely whenever you can, try to keep that pupillometer very well supported. Okay, so other than that, let me just stop my share for a second and look at what I had you go over. So I did have you listen to the rest of the chapter, right? So the rest of the book. I also there was a lot of stuff that like was covered in that section. So I do want to talk through that a little bit. I felt like the reading kind of mentioned some like really interesting topics, like amblyopia, anisometropia, and those are things that you guys see really all the time in the offices. So I kind of felt like like we're just like there's so much to kind of touch on. So I wanted to give you guys those videos to really get a little bit more info on, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. But if you weren't able to watch the videos before this class, I would really, really strongly recommend that you go back and check out those videos, because I really think like I said, some of the material in these books is super, super applicable to what we do on a daily basis, and some is not. And I would say the anisometropia, they say anisometropia in the video, but the anisometropia and the amblyopia, that's stuff that we're seeing quite a bit of. So, I would encourage you to kind of go and take a look at those. So, first thing I wanted to chat about was the whole idea of atropia versus aphoria. Maybe while I do this, I'll just share the picture from the book so that it you guys have at least something to kind of look at here. Where is it? There it is. Okay. All right. So, basically, the important parts of this are, honestly, um, you really probably should try to memorize the muscles. There's just a lot of memorization. It's kind of like It's like an anatomy test, right? It's like um, you never know quite what you're going to be asked, but it is quite possible that the muscles of the eye really could be on the test. My thought is that you want to focus your efforts on being very comfortable with the formulas on the test, because those it's a given that those are going to come up, and it requires you to know the formula, but it also gives you an opportunity if you know the formula to kind of answer the questions. Whereas if you haven't memorized the anatomy, it's like kind of black and white, like you have or you haven't. So at least of the formula, you have a good chance of being able to figure it out. But yeah, so all the different muscles of the eye are listed here. Um, but the really big topics, and I believe the texts have been discussing this anyway, so this actually might be quite familiar. But we're talking about the idea of aphoria versus atropia. Um, the way I kind of think of it is I think of phoria as the better of the two. Phoria is the one, that it's not like something that is super, super obvious right off the bat, right? Like it's something that, you may have noticed, just yourself, maybe, when you wake up, you have double vision, or, maybe you notice when you're tired, like you start to kind of like get a lot of blur. But it's not something that when people see you, they're going to be like, oh, wow, like that person has an eye turn. Whereas the tropia, it's a very clear, definite turning of the eye, right? So that can be, up and down. It can also be side to side. So think of phoria as kind of, the baby. The tropia is kind of the mommy, the parent condition, right? So that is definitely something I would remember. I know the techs have been working a lot with cover tests, so that's what you're working on detecting is if they have aphoria or tropia. Um, and then the other really important part of this is knowing the postures, right? So exo, thinking of it as, kind of going out, kind of diverging. ESO, when I think of ESO, I kind of think I used to have a Siamese cat who was cross-eyed, and I always think of him. His name was Vincent. And basically I think, yes, ESO, my cat, he was, definitely had atropia and esotropia. But then, of course, there's hyper and hypo. Hypo, you may have heard of like hypoglycemia or hypothyroid. That might help you remember kind of slow, low. Whereas hyper, you think of something kind of bouncing and, a kid with like a sugar high. I think of kind of like a high, like, kind of going up. So those are some, mnemonic devices that might help you, um, you know, remember that. I believe that I have, let me see if I can find it real quick, but I believe I have a picture that I wanted to show you oh yes, I do. Okay, cool. Let me make it a little bit bigger and share my screen. For the tropias, just real quick, you guys, sometimes it's helpful to visualize them. But basically you can kind of see exo, the outturning. It looks like it might be a little hyper in this picture too. But then you can see the ESO, you can see the hyper, and then the hypo. So, pretty straightforward. Definitely something that we do see in the office, and definitely something, if it's just kind of aphoria, that I know the techs have been detecting a lot of these, by the cover test and how much, the eye moves, when they see patients in the office. So, again, the whole point of this is that these can, if they're significant, can be corrected, with Prism, basically. Um, okay, so other things that were covered in that chapter. I'm just pulling up my book again here. Keep losing my page here. Okay. All right. Okay, so again, I'm gonna just share my screen so we have something interesting to look at here. Okay, so the next part is basically talking about the different types of vision. Now, you all should be somewhat familiar with this, but I do think that this is something that, especially I think on both the tech and the optical side, sometimes this is missed a little bit as to what exactly these conditions are, right? So basically, fairly straightforward. Emetropia is really when we say there's no prescription. I find that like it seems like most people do have some sort of prescription that you could find, but it's basically effectively, not needing correction. And what's happening there is that when this is the cornea here, this is the retina in the back, but when the light is entering the eye, going through the cornea, it's being refracted perfectly, and it meets at a point right on the retina. Okay, so that is what the ideal vision is. It says that the light rays come to a perfect focus at a distance of 20 feet. Okay, so one thing that I should point out here is that these are when you're looking in the distance, right? We're not really talking about accommodating at this point. Just remember that even if you are an emmetrope, you could be, become a presbyope, right? Because even emmetropes who don't need glasses all their lives are going to have trouble, accommodating and getting that light to the correct point when they're looking up close as they become presbyopic. Okay, so um, other things. The main thing with hyperopia versus myopia is that basically with myopia, the light is coming in straight, looks like things are pretty good, but then it's coming to a point that is in front of the retina. Okay, so one of the big things that you're going to kind of think about with differentiating myopia and hyperopia is where is this point of light coming to? Is it stopping short? Is it not getting all the way to the back of the eye? Or is it actually going beyond the back of the eye? Okay, so when it goes through the cornea, what's happening? Where is it kind of landing and resting? Okay, so one kind of interesting thing is that oftentimes hyperopes, you guys have probably met a number of hyperopes in the office who are really, really shocked that they need glasses. They're the people who say, oh, I've never had glasses, like everything has been fine, for my whole life. And what they've been doing is because they have this condition where the point of light naturally would go behind the eye, they can actually squeeze that lens, and even though we associate squeezing that lens with seeing up close, they can do it 24/7, like all the time. And so if they're not too much of a hyperope, right? If say maybe they're like a +1, sometimes +2, maybe when they're young, even a little higher, but they can squeeze and get that point to actually they drag that point forward so that it looks more like this emmetropic eye, right? So basically, they use those muscles to, when they're young, they're just squeezing all the time, even in the distance. Now, what's going to happen is they start to notice up close problems first because they're kind of constantly accommodating. And so they start to try to accommodate more to see up close and they start to notice some near blur. And then eventually, what happens is they just really can't accommodate in the distance either. So they really get hit hard because finally, kind of when they're fully presbyopic, they're blurry up close and they're blurry in the distance. So that, that's kind of a double whammy for them. But they are hard too because, they're some of those low plus people that feel like, well, it's clear without my glasses, right? And it's like, well, it's because your eyes are so used to accommodating in the distance. It's hard to relax those muscles. It's hard to let the glasses take effect. It's hard to let those muscles return to that natural posture for distance vision. So, I know you guys definitely encounter this, but that's one of the things with hyperopes is they tend to kind of accommodate at all times. But one thing also to remember is that typically a myope will have a long eyeball. Like it's actually like more of like, I mean, if you looked at it, like it probably wouldn't look like an oval, but it's going to be a little bit longer in shape. Whereas a hyperope is oftentimes going to have like a shorter eyeball too. So kind of an interesting thing there. Let's see if there's anything. Yeah. I mean, the thing about myopes, just in terms of a practical sense, is that they like are used to wearing glasses. They know they've always had glasses. They know they can't really see in the distance. So, it's just kind of a thing for them. They're not as like shocked. Whereas hyperopes, it's a bit more of a, oh no, like I've never had these before kind of situation. So, okay. So what goes goes on now, I do find that this is a little harder to understand. And I am not entirely sure if you guys had questions about it, but I do find that sometimes the astigmatisms, I feel like when you see pictures of it, you're like, oh yeah, of course, like this is exactly, what this means. But sometimes when you're actually like given a problem, um, it can be a little bit confusing. So, one of the things that will definitely appear on the test, and is just in general kind of an interesting thing to know, is how astigmatism kind of comes into play, right? So, we are talking about when we're talking about, you know, emetropia, hyperopia, myopia, we're typically talking about the sphere power, but of course, most people have some degree of astigmatism. So, now that can happen in two ways. Sometimes it's actually the shape of the eye itself, but oftentimes, more times, it's the shape of the cornea that causes the astigmatism. It's not perfectly spherical, so the light gets refracted in kind of a funny way once it enters the eye. So basically, again, fairly straightforward with the pictures, but what you're going to see is that with simple myopic astigmatism, the kind of the sphere power, right, or I guess it could be either power to some extent, but basically one power is going to go perfectly to the retina, right? So you can see that it looks emmetropic, it's meeting where it should be. But then the second power, kind of the astigmatism power, because of the shape of the cornea, is actually coming to a point in front of the retina. Okay, so because that is staying on the minus side, which is kind of falling short of the retina, you're going to be calling that simple myopic astigmatism, right? So we really only have one part of the power in a toric lens. We're having just one of the powers be myopic, okay? One of them is effectively kind of plano, going to where it should be, but the other power is myopic. Now, with hyperopic astigmatism, it's basically the reverse of that. So we still have one power going to the back of the retina perfectly, but the astigmatism is actually going and meeting at a point behind the retina. So one is emmetropic, the other one is going behind the retina, and so that one is thus hyperopic. Okay, so those ones I feel like are fairly straightforward. If we look down a little bit further, we have now compound myopic astigmatism and compound hyperopic. Basically, what's happening here is both the sphere power and the astigmatism power are falling short of the retina. They're both coming to a point that's not basically far enough back. And so we're seeing the astigmatism power and the sphere power in front of the retina. Same deal with the hyperopic one. Basically, they're coming into focus behind the retina, and it's both the astigmatism power and the sphere power. Okay. Um, Now, this one, the mixed astigmatism, is basically one of the points of light is coming in front of the retina, and one of them is coming behind the retina. Neither of them are good. Neither of them are. It's different from simple hyperopic and simple myopic in that neither point is where it should be, but they're one of them is basically nearsighted or minus, and one of them is farsighted or plus. So I do feel like with these, it helps to see them. Um, but when we get into prescriptions, it gets a little bit more tricky, I feel like, to visualize. So we're going to go over that just briefly. Do you guys have, what are your thoughts? Just weigh in for a second for me on just how you guys found that material, like with the pictures. Like, do the pictures kind of make sense to you? Do those terms, like, do you kind of get what we're saying here?
I've heard of those terms before, but seeing the pictures helps me to understand them because I've never had the pictures before.
Got
Yeah,
it.
pictures definitely help visualize it.
Okay. Okay, cool. Cool, cool. Awesome. Yeah. So I think the pictures help. The problem is that when you're actually doing the questions, sometimes it'll be like, okay, like if the light rays fall short of the retina, is it, myopic or hyperopic? And it's like, okay, cool. Like, so you can use the pictures, but then all of a sudden you kind of get into the actual prescriptions. And I find that that gets tricky, or at least I kind of definitely have a little bit of trouble with that. So what I wanted to do was just kind of draw those out a little bit, and talk about that. I also think that it's pretty helpful to have an optical cross lesson for doing this, because I think that while the pictures are helpful, once you kind of get into the, and I'm just pulling up my calculator here, but once you kind of get into like the numbers, like the hypotheticals, it gets a little bit tricky. So let me just see what I have for resources here, because I did um, put some stuff up here to my drive for meeting two. Okay, so we showed those pictures. Perfect. Okay. Um, so there are two ways that I would say are the best to kind of figure out how a prescription kind of plays out, I would say. But let's go through and kind of go, well, maybe we'll do both. One of them, they both involve skills. It's kind of weird the way the book is laid out, because both of figuring out these, they both involve skills that like are kind of introduced later in the book. One of them is the optical cross stuff. So I was thinking of kind of introducing that tonight and just, giving people like a little bit of a taste of it. I know the techs, you guys do optical cross work for contacts, which will give you a lot of help with it. Um, but basically, the other thing is transposing a prescription. I would say neither of them are very hard to do, but they do take a little bit of practice. And I know having confidence with it will definitely take some practice too. So what I'm gonna do here is let me. Oops, I lost my window here. Okay, let me pull up a whiteboard again. Um, okay, so when we have an optical cross, right? So basically, the way that helps me visualize this best. Oh, how do I? Oh, I guess I need to choose a new line here. Okay, so we have our optical cross, right? So, when I wish I should have brought home a stock lens for this, because I feel like it's just so easy to visualize when you see a stock lens. But basically, well, let's see if I can draw this here. But when you have a stock lens, or it could be a surface lens too, let's say that it's a minus lens, because that's the easiest to visualize. A minus lens is going to be, so let's say we have a lens, and then I'm doing my best to draw the cylinder. All right, not too bad here. Okay, so let's say we have a stock lens, right? So let's say this is like a -3. Okay, so we have kind of the surface, it's, you know, an ellipse, and then we have it kind of come down, and it's a -3 sphere lens. Okay, but what if we had a lens that was for a prescription? This doesn't make a ton of sense, but what if they had a lot of astigmatism? Okay, so let's think if they had if we wrote their prescription, it would be a -3 sphere with a -5 astigmatism. Okay, so what that lens would look like is in one area of the lens, like right here. Oops, I drew my thing backwards. It would just be the 3, right? But if you turned that lens so that you could see where the astigmatism was running through the lens, it would be really thick. So let's say that here's your 3, right? So I'm trying to match, you know, kind of what the edge looks like there. But basically, in one part of the lens, this is going to look really strange, but it's going to kind of look like this. Like, and what I'm trying to emphasize here is that like these sides are going to come down. And I'm trying to keep it looking rounded, but basically what I'm trying to show here, and hopefully it's a little bit clear, is that on two sides of the lens, it's much thicker, right? So it's basically like, think about it like the spherical power of that 3 goes all the way around. Okay, so let's say that this part, like, oh, I keep doing my thing backwards. I'm trying to do one of those little thingies, but let's say this area here, from here to here. Actually, let me change colors because I feel like I'm not going the right direction here. All right, so that was supposed to change colors. Okay, so say like you're like here to here. That's a 3, okay? But if you measured from here down to here, that's going to be the 5 still. Okay. So basically like what the deal is that the lens thickens on two sides of it, and then it's the 3 on the other sides. So what, long story short, what the optical cross is doing is it's basically like, all right, this is a toric lens. If we measured a spherical lens, it would be 3 all around, like, you know, the sphere of 3, whether it's plus or minus, it would show that power all around the sides of the lens. But when you have a toric lens, one of the sides is going to be 3, but the other sides are going to be a different power because you have all that astigmatism power. Okay, so the optical cross is saying, basically, you know, in this case, if we have, let's use a slightly different example. Let's say that we have, in this case, we're going to do our prescription is, let's do minus, let's say our script is -250. And let's say that the astigmatism measurement is -2. At this point, it really doesn't matter what the axis is, but we know that they're going to be 90 degrees apart, basically. But let's say on our optical cross, if we put the 250 here, then, and again, hopefully this is familiar to the text, we think about kind of jumping from this power to the full astigmatism power. Okay, so if you were on this lens, you're going to jump from here over to this corner. Sorry, not doing so well with my drawing. You're jumping from this point over to measuring this point. You're like, all right, it's kind of thin over here. I'm going to measure the thinnest point, and I'm also going to measure the thickest point on the lens. Okay. And so in this case, if it was 250 here and we have a 2 still, we're going to say, okay, it's changing by -2 still here. That means that the astigmatism, like, this is not saying what the power is over here. It's saying how much it changes when you go 90 degrees. So that means if we combine, think about it like a math problem, -250 -2, then we're going to be at a 450 over here, okay? So when we think of the optical cross way of doing that, the whole reason, I mean, I'm telling you this because it's good to kind of introduce you to the optical cross. Um, but what I'm talking about here, and the reason I'm talking about it is because this will illustrate the astigmatism. Okay. So if someone were to give you this problem here, and they're like, all right, so is this simple myopic astigmatism? Is this compound myopic astigmatism? Is this, mixed astigmatism? It becomes much more clear if you can see what the actual end result of the powers are. Basically, if you optical cross it out. Because if you were to draw the eye, here's the cornea, rough drawing of these. Let me change my color here. We'll go with blue. So basically what would be happening is it's going in, it's nice and straight, and what's happening is both of these are going to fall short of the, I guess how will I draw this? I'll draw it around it. Both of these, one is going to go a little farther than the other, but both of these points are going to fall short of the retina. So in this case, it's very clear because everything stays minus here, that it's going to be compound myopic astigmatism. Okay. So like it's kind of like, the pictures help, I think, but the optical cross is really what will kind of get you there. So let's do just one more real quick, because I think that might help a bit. So let's do this example if we did the optical cross. Now, when the text, just while I'm drawing this, when the texts are using the optical cross, you guys are using this for higher powered contacts, right? So if you have like a good amount of, yeah, no, Carrie, where were you going to say? That's what you,
Oh,
that's
no, I
when
was
you do
going to
it,
say,
right?
yes, exactly what you were saying. Higher astigmatism or higher, actually, yeah, higher astigmatism. I was going to say distance vision, but that is when we use the vertex, but that's beyond, that's
Yep.
not what we're talking about. That
Right. Well, yeah, so you're gonna like you would be vertexing it, right? So basically, um, the reason that they do these in contacts is because if you, the two powers here, depending on you guys will talk. Actually applies well to, and actually I think it was in one of the videos that we watched. He talked about how with anisometropia, it's really kind of comes into play when someone's wearing glasses because the glasses are usually we say about 14 millimeters from the eyeball, right? 12 to 14 millimeters. So if you wore a lens, a high powered lens, even just 12 to 14 millimeters, that can be quite significant and that can change the image size for you. Whereas, and so that's what the vertex, you have to figure out that vertex. Now, the same thing can kind of apply to contacts. Contacts, it's less significant, because it's on the eyeball. So you can you don't have to worry about vertex as much, but you do because you're refracting. You're not refracting. The phoropter is not sitting on the eyeball. You have to figure out the vertex measurement as well. So when techs are doing this, they're like the 450 needs, because it's a higher power, needs to be adjusted a little bit more than the two, or it needs to be adjusted, whereas the 250 doesn't. So long story short, I'm not expecting that opticians are like, oh yes, I fully get that. But it's something that I would, talk to a tech a little bit about, and kind of be like, hey, like, when do you use vertexing? What do you do? Like, how might that change the prescription, right? But anyway, optical cross. So let's say that if we're going to look at a different problem here. Let's take a look at, let's say our script this time is going to be plus 150. And again, the axis really doesn't matter at this point. Minus 1. Basically, if we were to do our optical cross, we're going to start with our sphere power here. So it's going to be the 150. We know that it's going to change over here by minus 1. So I'm going to put that in. So we're going to do out our math problem plus positive 150 with a negative 1. When you combine those, or in this case, you're subtracting, you're going to end up down here with a plus 50. So in this case, we're seeing now, like if you looked at this problem and you were like, oh, like what's it supposed to be? Is it, simple hyperopic astigmatism? Is it compound myopic? Is it compound? Is it mixed? You might look at this and be like, well, that's mixed. But it's actually not, because when you do it out, you find that both powers are in the plus. We have a plus 150, we have a plus 50. If I measured this out on the lens, if I measured over here, it would be a 150. If I measured 90 degrees away from it, it would be a 50. And so actually in this case, it is going to be the compound hyperopic astigmatism, which rather than this drawing would mean that, just real quick, if we had our eyeball, that would mean that the points are both going behind. Oof. The eyeball. Okay. So that is, a very helpful way to kind of figure out, what is the type of astigmatism. So again, we're going to return to the optical cross stuff. This is just a little intro. I would say with the optical cross, things to think about is remembering that the sill is not a measurement of the lens. Okay, this is not a power that you will find on the lens. Okay, it's really a way of just writing how different the two powers in the lens are from each other. Okay. The other thing to remember is that you can, once when you're doing an optical cross, do it like a math problem. Okay. So keep those signs. Don't change those signs at any point. This never becomes plus, this one never becomes minus, right? So, you're kind of putting the sphere power at the top, and then you're saying, okay, the amount that it's changing is 1. So if I do that math problem out, the other power is going to be a plus 50. Okay. It's kind of like when I was thinking about this, I was like, well, why don't we just write our scripts? Like, why would this script not just be plus 150 plus, 50 plus 0.5, right? Like, and it's like, well, I mean, you could just write it like that. It's just that we've chosen, not to do that. I was talking to Chris about it, and and I was like, oh, why do you think like it's written like that? And he was like, oh, probably because when you're grinding a lens, you kind of grind it to he was like, you probably grind it to the sphere power, and then you probably grind it this much more in this area. So I was like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. You'd grind this to to like a 150, all around it, and then in the in the cylinder areas and the other 2 points of the lens, you'd take off another diopter, basically. So anyway, that's just, but again, it's really just a way to notate prescriptions. You can also write prescriptions with plus. You guys have probably seen prescriptions from ophthalmologists come over with plus. So that's also, another way to write it. You can do the optical cross that way too. It's you're going to get the same, the same powers. But yeah, so that's how in general you want to kind of figure out the what is it, compound hyperopic mixed. Basically the mixed astigmatism, I didn't do one of these out, but what would happen if it was mixed astigmatism? I did compound myopic and I did compound hyperopic. If it was mixed astigmatism, one of the powers would be plus and one would be negative when you did the optical cross, and that would thus be, you have one power on one side, one power on the other. One thing is kind of coming in front of the retina, the other one is going beyond. So the other way to do it is to transpose the prescription. I feel like that's going to be a lot to kind of go into right tonight, because I do want to just briefly talk about the other stuff that we went over. But basically, you that's that's also another way that you can do this is by transposing the prescription from from minus sil to plus sil and seeing kind of where they end up. That's another way to look at this. So we can talk about that too, but for now, the optical cross is a good way to figure this out. How do you guys feel about that so far? Like, do you kind of get what we're doing? I'm expecting that we're going to go over it again, but how are you feeling so far on this topic?
Oh, is
Um,
that just for the? Oh, sorry.
no, you're good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm fine. Like, optical cross is like one of those things that like I can always use a little bit more practice on, but I've been exposed to it already, and we do use it already. So it is like it's something I do get. It's like more of like a review type of thing.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, Sam, what were you going to say?
It was Suzanne. So is that
Oh,
just
sorry.
for the purpose? Is that just for the purpose of figuring out what type of astigmatism it is?
So the optical cross is going to be, something that comes up in questions on the test. In other like scenarios, like it's also like there's a lot of stuff on the test about like, okay, if the front curve, of the lens, has like let's say a minus 250 and a minus 450, and then the back curve has, I don't know, a minus 2 and a minus 4. What's the power of the lens? So we'll go back and use the optical cross again. But why would you need optical cross in real life? That's a good question. I don't know. I think just to know what's actually going on, in the lens more. But to answer your question, um, the main purpose I would say that you would be using the optical cross, yeah, is to figure out what type of astigmatism it is. So,
Okay.
yeah. You want to be very comfortable with optical crosses. And again, I'm jumping ahead. I think this is in book 3. So it is something that's going to kind of come up. So we'll review it again. So if you're kind of like, oh my gosh, like what are we doing here? That's fine, but at least you've seen it a little. So, all
I
right.
can add, if that's
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
with gonna add on to what Michael said with us using it almost every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if any of the opticians ever need any help with kind of learning how to use it for the test, we're obviously able to help them out. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will take Carrie Crew's optical cross homework any day.
thanks, Sam.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah, 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 absolutely. So, it's honestly like you start to become really comfortable with it. You can kind of give yourself little problems and do it out. It's kind of fun, positive, negative math. Um, okay. So, let me stop with the whiteboard. Wait, hold up. Sorry, I almost ended the meeting. But basically, a couple things I wanted to go over. Actually, we'll go over our practice questions at the end because I just wanted to talk briefly about the videos. Again, if you didn't have a chance to watch those videos, they're just really interesting videos. Like, so I believe the first one I had you watch talks about aniseconia, also frequently called anisometropia. But basically, aniseconia means that there is a big difference between the eyes, between the prescription of the eyes, right? Um, Now, some of the opticians may have heard we used to do a thing. We used to do Shaw lenses, and basically there is a doctor. He's an optometrist, and his name is Dr. Shaw, and he developed lenses for people who had aniseconia, basically, or anisometropia, right? And basically, what the lenses do is they use vertex and they use different thicknesses of the lens material, sometimes different lens materials, to try to equalize image size, right? Because the real issue and what that video talked about was that I think they did I thought it was a great analogy talking about Sherlock Holmes with his magnifying glass. If you imagine like having a magnifying glass over one eye all the time, like it's a super easy way to imagine. Obviously, that's an extreme example, but that's in some ways like a really good analogy for what it can be like, right? So if you have one lens that's really minifying or minus, and the other lens that, doesn't have as much power, trying to equalize, one image, with a smaller image, like, is just your brain is going to have a lot of trouble with it. So we used to use Shaw lenses for people who, oftentimes what is done is that, like you said in the video, the brain just kind of turns off the input from one of those eyes, and they just kind of, they can see out of the eye, but it's just, it's not really used. But the Shaw lenses are designed to kind of reactivate that eye to start to use it, because obviously you don't have very good, like 3D kind of stereo vision if you're only using one eye. And then what else? Other things. Another thing that they mentioned, definitely something you should know, is antimetropia. That's when you have opposite signs in each eye. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a huge difference between the eyes, but it kind of means that the prescription in one eye is plus and the other eye is minus. So just, something that you should know in case that's listed on the test. Um, there was a really good video. I thought that was an interesting video. Actually, wait, were there two videos about? I can't remember now. About amblyopia. Let me look. Yes. So there was kind of the explanation of amblyopia and then the video of like, okay, what do you do about amblyopia? I will say that we do see people with amblyopia in our offices, but we don't typically see people who have like really kind of like super significant cases. Well, sometimes we do as adults, and it was just kind of something that was never addressed when they were kids. But basically, oftentimes if we see a child with amblyopia, I forgot what the the usual ages. I think they say like under, what is it, under 8, under 9, maybe even up to 10. You can still, get that vision. You still have a chance to get that vision in that eye back to 2020 or up to 2020. But so say, in our office, usually kids who are identified early, as having, one eye that has a very significant, prescription difference than the other, or if they have a significant case of amblyopia, that's found at their primary care physician when they're just doing, the eye chart on the wall. And so we don't typically see, these really like crazy cases of it. It's not to say that we never would, but the ones that we usually see are, either adults where it's just kind of been, no one caught it when they were younger. But then sometimes we'll see kids where, maybe one eye is kind of maybe 20/40, maybe 20/30. And then we're just, trying to, make sure that we prescribe glasses, that they're wearing it all the time. Sometimes they'll, dilate the eye or make the good eye blurry so that the other eye, can be used more. Other times they'll do patching to try to cover up the good eye. Basically, you want to kind of disable the good eye so that the eye that, needs to work and is usually being lazy, starts to kind of get activated, and make sure that both eyes ultimately get to 20/20 so that they have two good eyes they can use, so that they could start to hopefully, develop some stereo vision, some 3D, more depth perception. Um, but I thought those videos were just interesting, interesting cases. He did mention in one of the videos that there are a couple causes of amblyopia. Sometimes it can be caused by like, an eye turn, but other times it's refractive, meaning that, one of the bad eye was just never corrected to what it should have been, and the good eye just takes over, and so the bad eye just never develops fully to 20/20, and it's fully capable of it. It just, you can't get 20/20 vision if you don't have the correction, basically. So what we're trying to do in those refractive amblyopia cases, which again are the ones that we usually see, is make sure that that bad eye gets the correction to 20/20, or gets the, the eyeglass correction that it needs so that it can, be refracted to 20/20. Sometimes if people, are left uncorrected with amblyopia, the best they can be corrected to is 20/25, 20/30, sometimes worse than that. So, and that once you get above a certain age, I apologize, I forget what age it is, but I think it's above 10 or so, it's just okay, like it's done. You can't really fix it. So, sometimes parents, the doctor will say that to them and they don't really want to hear it, or they're not sure that that's true, but um it's definitely something that they should get on, that they need to, make sure the kid is wearing glasses for. So, um, I think that is really most of what the material was. I was going to just one last thing. I have a couple notes down here um, about prisms. I will get into this again, but just I think there was some. I think we talked about it enough. I was just going to mention again the idea of one of the things that we'll talk about quite a bit next time, so that I wanted you to kind of begin thinking about is just how plus lenses are two prisms um, with the wide parts put together, and minus lenses or the bases put together. And minus lenses have, the pointy parts, the apexes put together, because that's going to come into play when we talk about focal points and focal lengths and what that light is doing when it goes through those lenses. So um, but for the last part tonight, guys, I just have a couple practice questions I kind of like to go over. Okay, what is this going to look like on the test? So let me just share this real quick. Make it bigger too so that you guys can see it. Um, and then we should be just about done. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so these are, hopefully you can see these okay, but these are our practice questions. First one, what is myopia associated with? Is it a shorter than normal eyeball, irregular astigmatism, light rays focus behind the retina, or a longer than normal eyeball? Okay, so with all of our pictures, well, first off, irregular astigmatism, it's like, all right, like that is nothing that we've really mentioned or talked about. But we did talk about a shorter eyeball and a longer eyeball. We did talk about the light rays, so they're kind of throwing in some tricky stuff here. But basically, myopia, it's falling short, right? It's not getting to the retina. So it's going to be not going behind the retina. It's going to be a longer than normal eyeball in this case, but that's a sample question that you might see related to that. Other ones. Which of the following is not a type of astigmatism? So compound, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to click that. Compound emetropic. All right, that's not anything. Doesn't make any sense because emetropic means that, everything's perfect. So I don't know what it would be compounding. Simple hyperopic, compound myopic, and simple myopic. Okay, so basically, you have to kind of know the different types of astigmatism, the three at the bottom, the simple hyperopic, the compound myopic, and the simple myopic. Those are types of astigmatism. Compound hyperopic or compound emetropic doesn't isn't one. Doesn't make any sense. But you kind of have to know which ones, you be familiar, with what ones are for that. Next one is, which of the following is not a refractive error of the eye? Simple astigmatism, hyperopia, myopia, and strabismus. So strabismus, I can't remember if that was mentioned in kind of the glossary, kind of the end of no, it definitely would have been in the anatomy and physiology book. So basically, strabismus is, an eye turn. So that would be the answer there. We have, but you can kind of deduce that, hyperopia is, myopia is, astigmatism is. So, those are all refractive errors, whereas strabismus is not. All right. Anisoconia is caused by what? Trauma to the eye, keratoconus, unequal retinal image sizes, or excessive hyperopia. Okay, so anisoconia, you just kind of have to know it's unequal image sizes. Um, I guess if you didn't know what it was, you could have some trouble. But basically, none of the others really, make a ton of sense. Excessive hyperopia is, too much hyper trauma to the eye, I mean, I guess honestly you could probably argue that maybe, but yeah, so anyway, it's anisoconia. You need to know the definition: unequal retinal image sizes. All right. And then I did actually, let's jump down to this one. When one eye has a definite or obvious turning from its normal position, this one I thought was kind of interesting. They say, is it atropia, exotropia, phoria, or exophoria? So we know that it's going to be a definite turn. So phoria, think of it as the baby. Tropia, think of it as the bigger one. It's in this case, the answer is tropia. Now they also threw in exotropia. Um, so honestly, that's a little confusing because it could be exotropia, but my thought is that the answer in this one is going to be tropia because it's the big one, and they're not really telling us what direction it's turning, right? So they're not saying it's turning out. So we'll go with tropia. And then for the last bit here, we actually did this top problem out. Okay, this is when we drew on the whiteboard, but these are what the refractive astigmatism questions are like. So these can be tricky because if I were to just look at both of these, I'd be like, oh yeah, those are mixed astigmatism, right? And the case is that actually I would have to kind of do this one. No, actually, this one I think is mixed if we were to do this out, actually, because I think if we did this out, it would be plus 150 and then minus 0.25. So actually, this one is mixed astigmatism. But this one, when we did this out, this one was compound hyperopic. They're both powers in the lens would be in the hyperopic zone. So that's where the optical cross stuff really does come in handy. So yeah, this is what those tricky astigmatism questions look like. Those definitely are something that's taken me a while to kind of get a handle on. So because sometimes you're like, yeah, I get this, and then you're kind of, I don't know, you really have to have a method for figuring it out. You can't really just look at it and do it. So yeah, so that is I think the general stuff for meeting 2. Pretty much everything for tonight. Like I said, there is a bit more reading for the next meeting that we have. I did want to ask you, I know that the next meeting, I believe it falls on the night of Monday of Labor Day. So I don't know if there are a number of people who might be away for the weekend, or if that's going to be tricky. But what I'll have you guys do is just post in the channel, in the ABO channel, if you're not going to be able to make the meeting. And if we have a number of people that aren't going to be able to make it, we'll probably just switch to a different week, and just to make sure that not a ton of people are out. So let me know that, but I am going to post the stuff again. Just give yourself enough time to read, to listen. And because we do start to get into lenses, there's just a good amount of stuff. In some ways, I'm excited to get into the lens stuff. I feel like we've done, a lot of anatomy and a lot of math stuff. So the lenses is going to be, super applicable, especially for opticians, what they're doing every day. So, all right. Anything else before we break, or are we pretty good for now?
Everything seemed good.
Seemed okay. All right.
Yeah, great.
Okay, awesome. Well, sounds good. So I will post the stuff again. Let me know if there are going to be any schedule conflicts or things like that. And otherwise, I think we're all set. So thank you guys. I'll talk to you soon.
Yep.
Have a good night.
Thank
you.
you.
Have a
Good night,
good
guys.
night.
Bye.
Good night.